Week 6 of the grid ranking, and like you just were talking about, Sebastian Ogier continues to lead after winning Rally Portugal. He has a score of 21.14, and out of these 3 starts, 3 podiums, 2 of them being wins. Now, in the WRC rating, he is third behind Neuville and Evans. Tanak is only 4 points behind, and Adrian Foreman is 22 points behind in 5th place there, as you see the full screen. How long can Ogier stay in the top 5 of the WRC rating to stay in the grid ranking?
That seems to be a really hard question to answer because he's going to be in Rally Italy. So assuming he has another strong performance, podium, he's going to be up there more. He has another race schedule. But really, after those 2 races, what's the rest of the competition going to do? Because it's not like Sebastian Ogier has a person that's going out there and getting multiple wins with him. Thierry Neuville's the only driver running full-time that has a win this year. If none of the other full-time drivers could get a win, which will be really impossible unless Thierry Neuville keeps winning, he could be up there for quite some time. It's just a matter of how his schedule works out, what the other drivers could do each race weekend. It's going to be really interesting because when he does fall out of that top 5, the grid ranking's wide open just about.
Yeah, definitely, Joe. And I agree, it is a hard question to ask, but it just shows you how good Sebastian Ogier is. And if he keeps winning in his select races that he's running this season, it would not surprise me if we see him stay in the WRC grid rating longer than we all expect. It's just been incredible to watch a driver who's part-time, run as well as he's running. And I believe this goes back to the larger theme of what we've been talking about, Joe, that we need to see these full-time riders, out there winning all of these races instead of, the part-time guys like Ogier and Kali Rovanperä, just coming in winning, like every now and then, because it really seems like that WRC is still having that identity crisis that we've been talking about for over a year now. It's going to be interesting to see how this goes moving forward.
And looking at the rest of the standings, the first full-time driver is the one in second. That's Alex Palou. Now, Palou's worst finish in a points race this year is 5th place, but his win from the pole yesterday propelled him up to second in the grid ranking. Now, Palou has a 100% top 5 finish rate in IndyCar. The last time Palou did not finish in the top 10, Kobe brought this up during the IndyCar section, that was Portland in 2022, so well over a year ago when he finished 12th. Kobe, considering IndyCar is seen as one of the most competitive series globally compared to Formula One, especially where Max Verstappen's always expected to at least finish on the podium, does this make Palou's stats that much more impressive?
Yeah, definitely. And I actually think Alex Palou still doesn't get the respect that he deserves for being the great race car driver that he is. Because if you look at the speeds from practice, qualifying, and the race and all the lap times, IndyCar is extremely close. All the way from the top to the bottom of the field, and it's not like he's on a Red Bull where he's going to be over a second faster and he's going to win this race by like 25, 30 seconds sometimes. That doesn't happen. Alex Palou he's just really good at what he does, and the chemistry that he has with that number 10 team has been very impressive. So I was really glad when it was announced that this group was going to stay together instead of him going over to McLaren, because it really seems like Alex Palou and Chip Ganassi racing that number 10 team are setting themselves up to potentially go on a run here. I'm not going to say that he could eventually beat a Jimmy Johnson of IndyCar and go win 5 championships in a row, but I think Alex Palou is certainly driving extremely well right now, and I'm just impressed that he hasn't had anything go terribly wrong with him. And even in races, when something happened, he still finds a way to salvage the day and get a top 10 finish. This is a really good race car driver. I feel like he needs to get more respect, and I have a feeling as time goes on, he's finally going to get that recognition.
I 100% agree with you, Kobe. I think he is. A lot of folks underestimate his talent, what he does, because IndyCar, yes, it's one of the most competitive series. No doubt, Chip Ganassi Racing, one of the best teams out there. They could go out there and get wins. But you bring up Jimmy Johnson. Alex Palou at one point had Jimmy Johnson, Scott Dixon, Marcus Ericsson as teammates. That could have easily, especially if somebody new to the team, almost be in a way very intimidating. But he took that as a big learning opportunity, went out there, got the championship. He is just phenomenal what he's been doing at IndyCar, a series where one of the quotes that always stood out for me a couple of years ago when IndyCar had to start the season at Barber Motorsport Park. Colton Herta involved in a crash on the opening lap. He said, well, everyone's going to have a mulligan. Everyone's going to have one bad race. Alex Palou is not having these bad races. When your worst finish was an 8th place last year, when you've been finishing the top 10 since Portland 2022, that everybody else cannot have a bad race no more. You got to really step it up. Alex Palou is doing something we haven't seen in IndyCar in such a long time. Last year, he wrapped up the championship for the first time in over a decade. The IndyCar championship was wrapped up early, not at the last race. So what he is doing is very impressive in such a competitive series, because we all anticipate Max Verstappen to go out there, get everything, wins, dominate. Palou, not be as flashy as dominating a race like on a Verstappen level, but those stats, there's just something where 3 years ago, somebody told me any driver could have this kind of streak in IndyCar, I would have said, no way. Palou is doing it. What an impressive job.
And Joe, I'm glad you brought up the point about him having Scott Dixon and Jimmy Johnson as teammates at one point, because Palou even said himself, that having access to those championship winning drivers and legends of the sport, like he said, he picked their brains. He talked to Scott Dixon and Jimmy Johnson, pick their brains about, that championship pedigree and what it takes, to win a championship, and like what to do in this moment, at that moment. So it really seems like, Alex Palou wanted to be a student of the game, and he took in all of this information like a sponge. I think he's basically using what the teacher taught him and using them against the teacher now, with Scott Dixon. And for so many years, Scott Dixon has not only been one of the faces of IndyCar, but the face of the ultimate face of Chip Ganassi Racing. And with Scott, I have a feeling when Scott Dixon decides to retire, assuming Palou is still going to be in IndyCar and at Ganassi, I think Palou is setting himself up very nicely, to take over, as obviously not just one of the new faces of the IndyCar series, but also the face of Chip Ganassi Racing as well. So I think that everything that Palou learned from Scott Dixon on the IndyCar side of things, and Jimmy Johnson from the championship side of things as well, from his impressive run in NASCAR, I really think that's going to benefit Alex Palou in the future.
I was going to say, I guess Palou had 13 combined major championships, among his teammates. But I think even Tony Kanaan was with Ganassi at the time. I think he's got a championship over in IndyCar. So a lot of championship pedigree all throughout the Ganassi team. And Alex Palou has now had a couple of championships of his own in his resume. And I'm with you, Kobe. I think assuming that he sticks around at Ganassi especially. I mean, can you imagine an alternate timeline where he had jumped over to McLaren? I wonder where his career would be. Maybe he'd still be a championship contender with how strong he's been driving, but I think he's certainly very well positioned at Ganassi to continue to add to that legacy, especially whenever Scott Dixon decides to hang it up, which I think is still probably a few years away. Dixon's still a championship contender every year in his own right until further notice, but Palou certainly deserves a lot of credit for what he's done. Now, 9 drivers across the 7 series in the grid ranking have a 100% top 10 finish rate, only 4 with a 100% top 5 finish rate so far this year. Max Verstappen is not one of them. He's at 83% after his DNF in Australia. But, of course, if he wins so many races like he has the last couple of years, he can still easily close that gap. Ogier will only start a select few races, but if he wins them, his race stats will be hard to beat. Of course, you've got Verstappen, like we just mentioned. You could expect to win so many races, claim the grid ranking world championship for a second year in a row. Then you have Alex Palou, Mr. Consistency, in a series that is very competitive. Will Brown and Brock Feeney dominating, but battling each other, maybe taking wins away from each other in supercars. And then you've got the dynamic of Ogier, who's still just running part-time, but whenever he runs, seems to be in contention for the win and end up winning most of these races. So, Joe, what do you think of this new dynamic that we're seeing here in the grid ranking? Is it making it more unpredictable for the favorite to win the grid ranking world championship? And then you've got SVG now over in the Xfinity series, which isn't even part of the grid ranking.
Yeah, if SVG a couple of years ago just dominated. Last year, Max Verstappen dominated. Now it's like you have all this different dynamics where we all expect Max Verstappen to go out there just win, win, win. Well, now Lando Norris has to win. Can Ferrari do something? It's going to be really interesting to see how dominant Max Verstappen is going to be. He will still be dominant, no doubt, but it's going to be, can he have that same level as last year? If he doesn't, Can Alex Palou stay consistent? Could he get some wins? I mean, we talked about him dominating last year, but it was not the level of Max Verstappen. Of course, IndyCar, he could have a bad race and next thing you know, a slide going, fall down. Will Brown, Brock Feeney, those are two drivers that are surprising me. I thought there'll be a little bit more competition, but with everything going on, Supercars, Erebus not living up to what they had last year, those two I think could be battling each other. Then OJ just shows up, he wins, he still leads. It has made it to where last year, I think we all knew pretty much from the third week where it's like, okay, Max Verstappen just going to lead every single weekend of the grid ranking, and he did. The year before, we knew Shane Van Gisbergen was pretty much going to dominate. We had one lead change between him and Scott McLaughlin that year. Now I don't know what's going to happen this next weekend when we have Formula One. We anticipate Max Verstappen is going to be the heavy favorite, but can McLaren or Ferrari step it up? What's going to happen in supercars? It is really adding a new dynamic and just very interesting seeing the different approaches of a very dominant driver, a consistent driver, two teammates battling. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely, Joe. It's a lot of fun. And while I still think Max Verstappen is ultimately going to walk away with the Formula One World Championship this year, on the grid ranking side of things, at the very least, is keeping things very interesting, especially with the upgraded car that McLaren brought to Miami. Hopefully that upgraded car is going to allow them to challenge for wins, I'm not going to say on a more regular basis, but more often than they have been in the past. But certainly with all of the different things going on in the other series in the grid ranking, it really just keeps your head spinning. This might be one of the craziest, most unpredictable years that we've ever seen in the grid ranking up to this date, with this driver and this driver dominating, and then you have the part-time driver OJ coming where he wins and hurts the full-time drivers in the World Rally Championship grid rate. And this is a really crazy dynamic, and I think it's going to make the grid ranking even more interesting in the fall of this year.
And moving on now, Pedro Acosta fell out of the grid ranking after his DNF, and in the grid ranking for the first time since 2019 is Marc Marquez. Now, no rookies in the grid ranking at the moment, but let's talk about Memorial Day weekend this year. 2 weekends away, absolutely stacked with racing. Obviously, you have Formula One at Monaco, 2 Formula E races in Shanghai. MotoGP will be back at Barcelona. And then, of course, the 2 big races in the United States, the Coca-Cola World 600 at Charlotte Motor Speedway, and the biggest of them all, the Indianapolis 500 at IMS. Now, for Americans, this is a big holiday weekend, and we have a common tradition. Many like to say breakfast at Monaco, lunch at Indianapolis, and then dinner at Charlotte. Now, I guess if you're a race fan of series all around the world, you maybe have a brunch as well now, and a midnight food run, perhaps with Barcelona and Shanghai, respectively. Kobe, you said, I think earlier in the show, who doesn't want more racing here? But do you feel like maybe for this particular weekend, such a big weekend already with 3 crown jewel races, do we have a problem? Is there such thing as a problem as too many races on Memorial Day weekend?
Well, I guess if you're like a media outlet like Grid Network, it might be a problem considering that we cover all of these different racing series. So try to stay up and keep on top of all of them might be a little difficult for us on the media side of things. But if you're just a race fan who just love racing so much, then this is be a very special weekend for you. It seems like there's always something for everyone on this Memorial Day racing weekend. But preferably, I'd rather just focus on Formula One at Monaco, in the Indy 500 and NASCAR at Charlotte for the Coke 600, but add these other races as well. It's certainly going to be a lot more challenging to keep up with it all. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a problem. It's going to be hard for me to keep up with all of it, I must admit. But hey, it'll give us a lot to talk about here on our Grid Network programming.
A lot to talk about. Joshua Burch is going to have a very busy weekend talking about all these races. I mean, boy, that sleep schedule is going to be something else, but overall, for diehard fans of motorsports, this just, I think, adds on to it, where you got these additional races. It's almost just around-the-clock racing. This is just something where I think it adds on to it. Yeah, it's going to be more work, especially media outlets that cover all of them, like us. Joshua Burch, as I mentioned, he's going to have a busy race weekend. But so many great storylines, and I think overall, it just adds on to it. The big thing, though, I feel, especially since it is an American holiday, it's going to be really hard for the other races outside the Indy 500, Coke 600, Monaco, to really gain traction. We don't see MotoGP, Formula E trying to make a tradition of being on this race weekend. It'll be really interesting to see if they could get more of that audience capture because they know, hey, there's these 3 big races. The timing, we're not going to compete, but we're before. It'll be really interesting to see what happens. But for right now, I'm happy with it. I'm looking forward to that weekend. I'm just thrilled that already we're only 2 weekends away from it.